Hello, and welcome to The Explainer. If you're tuning in, there's a really good chance you're a parent carer of a child or young person with SEND. And let's be honest, that means you are probably completely exhausted. You're juggling endless appointments, therapies, and literally mountains of paperwork just to get the basic support your family absolutely needs. Well, today we are diving straight into a crucial explainer covering the Department for Work and Pensions July 9th, 2026 press release. It's all about the massive TIMS review into the Personal Independence Payment, or PIP. We're going to break down exactly what the government found, what major charities are saying about it, and what all this actually means for your child's future support. So, are you tired of constantly fighting the system for your child's PIP? I really want to just take a second here and validate that sheer frustration you face every single time one of those dreaded brown envelopes lands on your doormat. You know the drill, right? The repetitive forms, the intense stress of gathering evidence again, and that underlying fear of getting an assessor who just doesn't get complex or fluctuating needs. It feels like an endless battle. But here's the thing. Today's explainer is going to show you that you are definitely not alone in feeling this way, and incredibly, the system itself is finally admitting it. Okay, let's dive into this. Just look at this explosive headline straight out of the TIMS Review interim report. The government has explicitly stated in black and white that personal independence payment is no longer fit for purpose. I mean, wow. Think about the sheer magnitude of that statement for a second. They are openly admitting that millions of disabled people are being failed by a benefit that just isn't working anymore. The review openly acknowledges that PIP has completely failed to keep pace with how disability, health, and work have changed over the last decade. It's a massive admission that those relentless struggles you've been having are real, they are systemic, and they are finally being recognized at the very top. And what's truly staggering here is the actual data. When the TIMS review opened its call for evidence, an overwhelming 90% of respondents described their experiences of claiming PIP negatively. Think about that. 90%. That is 9 out of 10 people raising huge red flags about the whole process, from the very first application, right through the assessments, and all the way to the appeals. It basically tells us that having a terrible experience with PIP isn't just some rare exception. Sadly, it's become the absolute rule. So what exactly are people saying? Well, the interim report didn't pull any punches. Claimants described the assessment criteria, which, let's remember, was designed way back in 2013, as creating this incredibly inconsistent and deeply damaging environment. The words that just kept coming up over and over again were dehumanizing, degrading, and stressful. You know all that supporting evidence you spend literally weeks gathering? It's far too often just used inconsistently. And maybe the most shocking part of all this, only 5% of the responses about the claiming process were actually positive. 5%. It paints a really grim picture of a system that's actively wearing down the exact people it's supposed to be lifting up. And I want to be super clear about something. These findings aren't just guesses, and they aren't isolated anecdotes. They're drawn from over 38,000 responses to the review's call for evidence. That is an absolutely enormous sample size. We're talking about disabled people, parent carers like you, various organizations, and experts who all took the time to share their real, lived experiences. The government has heard loud and clear from tens of thousands of voices that the system is totally broken. And that massive response forms the absolute backbone of the evidence driving this whole review. Which brings us to how this review is actually being conducted, because we need to shift from just looking at the problems to how we actually find the solutions. The DWP is highlighting that this is the largest co-produced review the government has ever undertaken at a national level. But what does co-production actually mean in the real world? Well, it means that disabled people, disabled people's organizations, and experts aren't just filling out online surveys from the outside. They're actually sitting on the steering group. They're directly shaping the work, the testing, and the recommendations from the inside out. It's bringing real, lived experience together with policy knowledge, which is absolutely crucial to make sure the actual realities of your family's daily life are finally at the core of the reform. And this whole process has really uncovered the true duality of PIP. For a lot of people, it does exactly what it's supposed to do. It's a vital lifeline. Disabled people consistently describe it as the literal difference between independence and complete isolation. Without it, so many would be housebound or entirely dependent on their families. But on the flip side, the incredibly dark reality is that the actual process of getting and then keeping that lifeline is totally dehumanizing and stressful. And paradoxically, it creates these massive administrative barriers to just participating fully in work or community life. This is especially true for young people with multiple, less visible or fluctuating conditions, which, let's face it, is a reality so many SEND families know all too well. So how are the major national charities reacting to all this? Let's take a look at MenCap. John Sparks, their CEO, hit the nail on the head when he pointed out that the current process places an unfair administrative and emotional burden on people with a learning disability and their families. He's specifically validating all those entirely needless fights and unnecessary reassessments that SEND families are forced to endure year after year. It is such an important validation. Having to repeatedly prove a lifelong condition exists is an active harm, and it just creates deep distrust in the whole decision-making process. Building right on that, Harriet Edwards from Sense highlights a genuinely shocking statistic from their own research. Get this. Nearly half of disabled people with complex needs on benefits reported that the actual application process made their conditions worse. Half of them. I mean, a system that is literally designed to offer support is actively causing harm. When the bureaucracy itself becomes a detriment to a young person's health, it becomes glaringly obvious to everyone that the system urgently, desperately needs to change. And that consensus just keeps going. Sarah Hughes, the CEO of Mind, echoes these exact same sentiments, plainly stating that the PIP system damages trust. When we look at charities like Mind, MenCap, Sense, Scope, and Parkinson's UK, who were all quoted in the press release, by the way, there is this incredibly broad, unified consensus across the entire disability sector. They all agree that trust has been completely shattered. A system that doesn't feel humane simply isn't going to command trust from the public. Rebuilding that trust is going to be absolutely vital if PIP is ever going to be fit and fair for the future. Now, to really understand why this review is happening right now, we have to impartially look at the data that's driving the government's concern. Back when PIP was first introduced in 2013, the prevalence of disability among working-age people was under 17%. Today, that number has surged to 24%. That represents around 10 million people in the UK. The press release specifically notes that there have been much greater increases in the prevalence of disability among young people, along with a really significant rise in mental health conditions. So the review has to figure out exactly how to address these shifting trends, while somehow keeping the whole system sustainable for future generations. So what does the timeline for all of this actually look like? Well, we started with a call for evidence between March and May of 2026. And right now, as of July 9th, 2026, we've seen the publication of this interim report. But, the work certainly doesn't stop here. The steering group is now moving into the next crucial phase. They're taking all of this lived experience and using it to actively design and test new recommendations for change. The ultimate destination on this timeline is autumn 2026, which is when the final recommendations are going to be published. The overarching goal moving forward, which is being demanded by both the reviewers and the disability organizations, is crystal clear. It is all about creating practical, genuinely deliverable proposals that actually support disabled people without harming them in the process. It's about building a system that understands the daily reality of people's lives, one that finally puts an end to unnecessary reassessments for progressive or lifelong conditions, and ensures that the core foundation of PIP is built entirely on fairness, dignity, and respect. Yes, it has to remain sustainable, but above all else, it absolutely must be humane. So here's the big question to leave you with. Will the final recommendations in autumn finally put dignity back into disability support? The government has openly admitted the system is broken. The major charities have clearly laid out the harm it causes, and you, the parent carers, have provided the undeniable evidence of your daily struggles. As we wait for that final report later this year, I think there's reason to be cautiously optimistic that genuine, co-produced reform might actually be on the horizon for your children. Keep a really close eye on those autumn 2026 updates, because for our young people with SEND, the stakes have literally never been higher. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you next time.